Welcome to the AW Podcast. This is LaShawna Moyle, a licensed social worker.
And this is Josh Van Zwieten, also a licensed social worker. Welcome, and we are talking about conflict today.
Conflict.
And, so you want to fight?
Put up your dukes.
Right, put up your dukes. Here we go. Right, and that's oftentimes what we think about when we think about conflict, is that we want to fight, or that we want to, it's going to be a battle, or it's going to be a war, right? We often think of conflict as a bad thing. But conflict is really the signal that we get, and it's saying, hey, something's not right here. Something needs to change. You know, whether that's a level of acceptance, whether that's finding an answer that works for both parties, or whether it's maybe it's going against your values and you need to do something different too, right? So really it's a call for change, something different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great that you say that. So negative connotation to it. But yeah, I think of it as a mismatch. And if you think of mismatch, right, there was something trending, and it may still be trending, right, because I'm older, but my kids would wear socks that didn't match, right?
Oh,
so it was
I remember
a mismatch.
that, yeah.
Yeah. So not necessarily negative, right? It was trending.
Right.
It was cool.
Sure.
But they just didn't align. They didn't look the same, right? So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it was kind of a conflicting pattern, if you will.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it doesn't always have to be bad.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about first, sometimes conflict is unproductive.
Yeah.
And conflict doesn't always have to be unproductive. But again, when I'm trying to prove you wrong and you're trying to prove, me wrong, and I'm trying to prove me right, and you're trying to prove you right?
Yeah.
It kind of seems like it's confusing already.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's exactly right. So when I was doing a little bit of work on the episode, when I thought of writing unproductive conflict, I thought of something funny. With Abbott and Costello, they used to do this routine, and maybe you've heard it on Who's on First, What's on Second. And they're bantering back and forth. And so they're talking about the names of the baseball players, but then he's like, who's on first, as it's a name. But then the other guy, I don't know who's doing what part, but the other guy's like, well, who's on first? And he's like, well, who's on first? Right? And no, what's on second? What's on second? Right? So, and then I don't know who's on third base. And they're bantering back and forth of this argue. And it's a cycle, right? And they go on for a couple minutes. And of course, it's a comedy routine, but it's just kind of an interesting way to think about how conflict can be a signal for if it's unproductive, right?
Absolutely.
If it continues to go in a circle with no resolution, really we're not making any ground or any progress, right?
Right. And I think you're right. Yeah, it's about when you're in that place of trying to prove either you're right or somebody's wrong, right? Absolutely nobody's ever going to align or match, if you will, because the point of it is to prove or disprove, right? And so, yeah, there's always going to be that misalignment which is unproductive, like you're saying. Yes, absolutely. Right.
And many of the times we work with clients who have an internal conflict that is unproductive, right? It's based in this grand, elaborate story and not based in fact. And so we teach things like checking for the facts and writing things down to determine, or to take the power out of the conflict and say, let's turn towards the answer, right? Because there's a story in AA where they talk about acceptance as the answer, but there's a line in there where it's talking about if you focus on the answer will grow, but if you focus on the problem will grow. Mm-hmm. And it's so true with internal conflict.
Yeah, I say that actually probably daily to those that I work with about that whole piece of that negativity, right? And yes, it just grabs on and takes hold, right?
It does, yeah, and it loves it.
It does.
It loves it. Conflict loves to be fed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then, getting anything in there that's positive, it just doesn't seem right. And it doesn't align. And so that it goes right out the window, and here we are again back into that negative confliction of all that turmoil, right? All that negativity going on. Yeah.
Right. We're talking about a friend maybe, and I think communication in this day and age is complex, right? Because there's so many forms of communication. So some of the things that I hear sometimes with clients too is being left on red or left on open. And then there's this internal conflict that starts, right? Like, do they like me? Do they really like me? And then it turns towards hostility and towards like, maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe I'm a failure, and it just goes and goes and goes.
Yes.
And this anxiety just spikes up.
That's so funny that you bring that up. Yes, the on red, I hear that probably daily too with individuals I work with. And you're right, it is. It causes people to question many things about themselves. And I find that very intriguing also, that, of course, that's what you're seeing in terms of, and you're right, that does cause internal conflict and questioning of oneself and why. And then, that anger builds, right? Because the underlying stuff. And so then we start to see anger and other emotions. Yep.
Right. And then sometimes we damage friendships in that regard when it's not based in fact, because I think our brains love drama because it's almost this protective mechanism, right? If I put a lot of drama around this, I'm going to go into fight or flight or freeze. Yeah. And therefore I can, push that person. I can push myself away from vulnerability, which we talked about last week.
Yes.
And protect myself by putting myself into conflict with that situation, if that makes any sense.
It does. And then when that conflict is there and you're kind of protecting yourself, as you're saying, right, then you are in the right? So we're back to that whole right and wrong thing. But if you're right, then they can be wrong. And that helps keep that distance and makes you feel a little bit more confident in some of that decision making.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where we teach grabbing that story, grabbing that thought, writing it on paper, and then examining it for the facts.
Yes.
Like what's actually happening here. And most of the time it's like, oh, the friend was at work and they were busy. And usually it's a simple answer, not all the time, but usually it is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's also this unproductive conflict, and we've sort of, there's this prove me right, prove me wrong, and then there's this no answer is found, right? And I put a little note in there, dishes, right? I'm with my partner, and we're like, there's a sink full of dishes here, and maybe I feel like, according to my scoreboard, because this is where it goes wrong, we start keeping score. I'm like,
my favorite game.
Yeah, right. You didn't do the dishes. Like, I always do the dishes. Like, always. And you never do the dishes. Right. And then what would you say?
Well, I cooked.
Right. Like, I always do the cooking, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm always taking care of our child, or
yes.
I'm, working, or, you name it, right?
Absolutely.
So then it's more this, we jump right into accusing each other and keeping score.
Yes.
And it's not towards this goal of a resolution or answer then. Yep. And we fall off board arguing, right?
Yep. And they're still dirty dishes.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that already. And you're going to do them, I suppose. Yeah. We'll have LaShawna come right over to my house and say, hey, you got to do the dishes. You said on the podcast. So how do we know if conflict is productive? Like, does that even fit in a sentence together? Conflict and productive.
I think conflict and productivity are good because, as we talked about, if you're searching for that answer, then instead of that misalignment, then yes, it's productive. If you come to a place where you compromise or there's an understanding, right? Absolutely, that's productive. And generally, when there's compromise and understanding, everybody's learning something, which is very productive, right?
Right. And it's really on, both participants in the argument, right? Or in the conflict, I should say, not the argument, the conflict,
right?
To work towards that revolution. Wow. Right. Resolution, right, is different than revolution. Yes. Right. But with resolution, right? So I think it was last week or the week before, LaShawna and I, and she doesn't know I'm going to do these things a lot of times. So, right.
Here's some conflict brewing.
Right. Here it is. Let's fight. No, let's not do that. But we're talking about, something that was going on, and, so I jump into my questioning mode, right? And I just did that automatically, right? Because I didn't have the same experience with the person or whatever we were discussing. And she came to me, I think it was the next day or so, or maybe even in the moment, and you're like, hey, you questioned me.
I think we gave it several hours the next day.
Yeah.
There was some time in between.
Yeah. And I think we came to a resolution because I hope that I validated that. And I didn't know I was doing that, but I was.
And that's a good, because we were misaligned, right? There was something off there. And we took some time, right? And we revisited that and we came to the middle, right? And we both, I hope, grew and learned from that. I think I've learned a couple different things, right? But that's very interesting. And no, I didn't know you were going to bring that to me.
How about that? How about just throwing it out there and seeing what we can do with it?
Yeah.
But it is so true because, in this moment, so I walked away from that conversation thinking that it was a productive conversation. I was helping Lashana see perspective, right?
Yeah.
And little did I know that Lashana went home and was processing that moment and potentially could have turned that into internal conflict for herself, but instead she came back and she said, hey, this is the boundary, this is what this felt like, right? And there, I could have said, well, come on, like, you didn't need to feel that way, like, you don't need to do that, right? But instead, I said, oh, I didn't know I did that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. And I have a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to internalize a lot of things. And so I think, again, in terms of relationships, right, and trust and vulnerability and all those things we've kind of been discussing these past several weeks, all of those things came to play there in terms of that conflict, if you will, and how then deciding to confront or not, or maybe what the other individual had at stake or where they were coming from, like you said, that perspective, right? And acknowledging that. Like, for instance, when you're talking about that, I was left on red, right?
Yeah.
You're not really thinking about the other person's perspective, like you said. And so in this particular instance, yes, I had to, take in some other things.
Right. And let me know what was happening, right? So I can be more aware, right? And that's our answer that we've moved forward with. But it's important, if you're feeling those signals come up or you're feeling that, I don't know, doubting yourself because of something, right? Usually it means that either I got to talk to someone, maybe I got to be vulnerable in a situation, or, maybe I have to make a different decision, right? And those can be hard things, right? Those are moments of vulnerability for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point too, because like you were saying earlier, if you're trying to prove yourself right or somebody else wrong, if you continue to not revisit that or review that, then you're always going to try to be doing that in that situation. You're always going to be trying to prove the other individual wrong or always trying to prove yourself right instead of finding a way to make the conflict productive. So,
right. How can we move forward together, right? Does that mean we have to set our differences aside? Maybe. Does it mean that we have to find a resolution? Maybe, right? Does it mean we have to go different ways in different directions sometimes because we won't get along anymore? Yeah, that can be too. Yep. But the purpose is that we focus on the we, right? If it starts feeling like me or I, then it's going to be war, right? Or battles and battles and battles and battles and battles, right?
Yes.
Because pretty soon it's going to be like, well, why don't you put the clothes away? I do the laundry and fold them. Why don't you put them away, right? And why don't you clean the floor? Or it just keeps going, right? And pretty soon it's like, well, last week I cleaned the floor and you didn't fold the laundry, and we got this giant scoreboard that has all these things attached to it. Yep. And we're not being productive because we're not focused on the we. We're focused on just me.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. And then there's a winner and a loser, and that's not good.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. And, even if we have to part ways, right, because we can't agree on something, right, you're both a winner in the sense, right?
Absolutely.
Because we can agree to disagree.
Yes.
And come back sometimes if it's like, okay, I evaluated that for 2 years and now I'm back at it again, right?
Yeah. So, and you're still learning from that. Even if you do decide to part ways, whatever that looks like, you're still learning, right? Yeah. And you take a piece of whatever that is onto the next round, if you will.
Right. When the next stressful event comes up, because we are faced with conflict, probably almost on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Right? Most of us are pretty good at finding answers, and in fact, our brains love to find answers, right? We're problem-solving, analytical and judgmental brains, so we love to find answers, and sometimes the answer is clarification, right? Sometimes I just need clarification. If I was left on red, we go back to that example,
Right.
or left on open. Sometimes it's like, okay, what was going on? That kind of hurt my feelings, right? If the relationship is one that can be vulnerable and trusted, we should be able to say, hey, that kind of hurt my feelings, and then Lashana could jump in and say, hey, I was busy and I was doing this and I forgot, and I'm sorry about that, right?
Yeah. And I think clarification is awesome. I think as therapists, we do that a lot too with the individuals we work with for various reasons, right? But also so there isn't that piece or that feeling of conflict, right, within the sessions that we have. We clarify a lot to make sure, again, that there's nothing mismatched, that we're not misaligned with those that we are working with.
Right.
And so it's good in practice, I think, across the board, just to clarify. And clarification offers a piece for maybe there not to be like that hostility piece, right? Hey, I'm asking a question here. I'm pretty unknowing. Again, it does offer a little bit of vulnerability again, but it takes some of that hostility and negativity away from it too.
Right. Yeah, and all conflict, will eventually lead to some sort of answer. And sometimes conflict is pretty tough and needed, right?
Absolutely.
But it does push forward change, and it's that signal saying something does need to change, right?
Yeah.
And we can see it all around us. National news or what, we can see it.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah. One of the things that, because our brains are so fantastic at being efficient and learning and growing and things like that, and because of that efficient, we like to label things right away, right? So we're going to play a little bit of a game here. And I gave Lashana a tiny little bit heads up before this, right? Just a tiny little bit of a heads up. But we can, with our brains, automatically give things label, right? And when there's a conflict, we tend to do that pretty quickly, right? And so what that helps us do is process through information faster so we can protect ourselves more, right? So let's play this little game. What Lashana has to do is say good or bad, and I'm going to name it an emotion.
Okay.
Or I'm going to say a word. Let's just say that because not all of them
keeping
are
score,
emotions.
Josh.
Right. And I'm going to write down the score. Okay. She'll get them wrong. No.
Okay, so I'm saying good or bad.
You're saying good or bad.
All right.
Yeah, that's all you got to say. First thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
All right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, happy.
Good.
Mad.
Bad.
Sad.
Bad.
Glad.
Good.
Joy.
Good.
Excitement.
Good.
Anger.
Bad.
Accomplishment.
Good.
Positive.
Good.
Negative.
Bad.
Fight.
Bad.
Love.
Good.
Answer.
Bad.
Answer.
Answer. Good.
Yes. Conflict.
Bad.
Yeah. Isn't that something? And usually I go off into a story here because I kind of know what I'm going for here. And I talk about a time I lost a grandfather, or in my grandmother and a grandfather. We have one grandmother left. And I'll tell the audience if I'm doing a presentation that I felt really sad there. Now, was that bad?
Well, no, I think it was relevant to the situation.
And then I'll say, but wait, what did we just say? right? You see what we do there?
Yes.
But I can say in the moment, right?
Absolutely.
Tearing up and having tears, even at the funeral, right? I can be like, oh, I got to hold it back. I got to toughen up. I'm going to get through this. All those things too, right? Because we automatically label it as bad. And we do the same thing. We did it with conflict there at the end and intentionally placed it at the end because most of the time we label conflict as bad, not as something that's going to find us an answer, right?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's kind of an eye-opening thing. The first time I seen it done, I was like, wow, ouch, because I did that too. Right? It was like, ooh. That's why, right, we need to give ourselves pause. We need to expand the gap between our thinking and doing a lot of times. So that's why we teach mindfulness and grounding techniques and things like that, so we can give ourselves pause to find a different answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how many times would you say that you teach a skill related to grounding a day?
Oh my goodness. I've been using that much more often. So I'd say anywhere from 2 to 4, depending on, my flow and how many people I'm seeing. But it's picking up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's lots of handy dandy little acronyms to help us with that, right? When we're most susceptible to that automatic response is we use the acronym HALT, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what HALT means. The first is H, and that's hungry, right? Why would that make a difference?
Well, when we're hungry, I think, we're irritated. There's all kinds of things that it does in our brains and our bodies, right? And it grabs onto things.
It does, yeah, right.
And pulls it all together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second one's A, and sometimes we can be hangry, right? And the A
There
is the
you
angry.
go, hangry.
Yes.
That one fits me pretty well.
I have that, yeah, that feeling quite frequently. But anger, what does anger do to that automatic response?
Oh, anger. I think anger can take us to so many places. We can become loud, we can isolate, we can become animated to where we're moving about, throwing things. It can just change the trajectory of all kinds of things, right? We can pull others in. But anger also has various characteristics, if you will, that come along with it.
Yeah, yeah. The last two are lonely and tired. And those are, two things too. Like that we automatically throw a bunch of armor on and say, let's go to battle, right? Yeah. Because if I'm lonely, I'm definitely going to lash out when people are trying to attack me or I perceive things as attacks. Same thing with tired. We're not going to do as well when we're tired. I'm not a nice person at night in the middle of the night if I get woke up, right? And I really have to give myself pause sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are things
angry and tired.
Right, angry and tired. Oh dear.
Watch out.
Right. Here it comes. But those are just, it's a handy acronym to say, okay, we need to stop. And maybe we need to do some self-care or figure out what's going on, because those are cues within ourselves that are saying, hey, we need to meet some different needs before, we can talk about, doing the dishes or laundry or whatever it may be, if that's what we're arguing about. Yeah. The last one is STAR. And to be a star, I always tell my clients, you have to stop, think, act, and reflect, right? Because not every action is going to go as planned. And then we need to reflect. And the reflection process is something that we try to do ourselves and teach with journaling practices too. Yeah.
And I think the stopping, especially like in some of the grounding techniques like you brought up, right? I've had instances where I've worked with younger children previously, and they would get very worked up and be yelling and just combative with maybe another teacher and a student in the room. And so, of course, they would be trying to get the student to leave the room. And if I would come in, right, the first thing I would tell the student to do when we stepped out in the hallway would be to let your butt hit the floor, right? Because you're just stopping, right? You're touching, right? You get that sensation. But it automatically, almost always, their mouth stops, right? Now they're thinking, right? Right. And so, that's.
Oh, that's a great thing. Yes. I should have had that tool when I was working with adolescents for sure. But sometimes, you do. You need to let's hit the ground first. My go-to was start with where you want to end, right? So pay attention to your tone and all those kind of things and the language you're using, right? If we match them, then it's like a who can outdo the next person game. So
right.
Yeah. So anything you would want to add, before we get into the conflict of pursuing our goals and talking about that conflict that sometimes happens?
I think something I want to address with conflict that I've dealt with a lot recently in terms of those that I've been working with is conflict within the family. And just remembering, right, if this is you out there, if you're having some conflict within the family, remembering that, again, what Josh and I have said here today in terms of maybe stopping and pausing and letting yourself and the other individual or individuals have space because these individuals are important to you, people you care about, and trying to gain that perspective on their side, right? Trying to see where they're coming from, and hopefully they're doing the same, right, with you. But just remembering, because, it can get pretty intense within the family system, and we grab others who we try to pull on our side to prove that right or wrong thing going on.
Yeah.
And so again, just, really taking some pause and giving a second thought in terms of that.
For sure. Yeah. Kind of like see the human in front of you.
Absolutely.
Recognize that a perspective most all the time is constructed, right? And we need to understand that. But at the core of it, it's a human in front of you.
Right. And what's really important. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. For sure. So how you doing on them goals?
Oh, my. Well, I knew we had to talk about this today, and that didn't really motivate me to do any better on my reading goal. So I haven't done any reading, but I did, however, touch the book and take a picture of it and send it to a friend.
Oh, nice. Just to get look, I'm going to read this book.
Ran into a friend and talked about my goals and mentioned this book and couldn't remember the title. And so when I got home and thought about it, took a picture and sent it.
Right.
That's all I've done with it for the week. So.
Neat. Well, maybe she can join you and you have a little sort of book club together.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea, and that was maybe I can, receive some encouragement because I'm struggling with reading. Even though, like I said last week, I am enjoying the book.
Awesome.
Asserting myself more. I think that I haven't done a good job in terms of tracking it. I said I was going to keep it written down in my planner, and I know I haven't done that. But I do believe that I have been assertive in terms of the verbiage I've used in certain areas. And I've done that, I think, both at work and at home. As I've said before, I'm a mom. That role is changing, but my daughter is 18, and I've had to assert myself a bit more with her.
Oh, sure.
And reminding her that, while she is my daughter and will always be my baby, she is also an adult. And so...
Yeah, right. Allowing them to make decisions is a hard thing to go to.
Yes. And at work, just being able to say things and not maybe shy away from things. And so those are things I'm working on. But so I did better in that area than the reading.
Right. Because there's lots of factors when it comes to saying something, just any conflict, right?
Absolutely.
It's part of asserting ourselves, too. And it's not a bad word either. A lot of times assert gets that bad label, too.
It does. Yeah. It does. And especially as a female, right?
Yeah.
You got to make sure that
Indeed.
we fit certain characteristics as well in certain circles. So, yeah.
Right.
I feel good about assertive this week, so.
Right. That code switching that we talked about.
Yes.
Yeah. So Josh and his goals. Oh dear. So I think with the eating healthy, I've done really well.
Good
those 5 days. I really need to include the weekend and my evening meal too, because I feel like that's the time where I struggle. So maybe that's March on, because I think my first check-in is March to see how I'm doing. Now for the exercising and the physical well-being, thankfully we have Lashana, right here with me. So she helps tremendously in getting, I think I'm probably averaging twice a week.
Hey, that's all right.
I'm not at my 3. So really I'm going to have to extend that a little bit because next week is March already.
I know. Wow.
Crazy. Yeah. And really probably when this podcast airs, it'll be March. So
yeah, but baby steps, right?
That's right.
Baby steps. So 2 times a week. Okay. That's progress.
Yeah. Yes. I set my alarm back for 5:00 and I'm adjusting to that and waking up to that now. And now I just got to do the next step and head downstairs and get on those exercise machines who aren't doing it for me. So I got this bike and I'm like, okay, I'm going to exercise because I got the bike and it hasn't done it for me.
Well, yeah. That didn't come in the instruction packet?
I guess not.
All
I guess
right.
not. But it
Okay.
is about that commitment, right? That just go for it.
Assert yourself, Josh.
Assert myself. Right, I know. Oh, yeah. And then mindful breathing. I've been probably around 3 times. I'm not quite up to, 3 days per week is what my goal was. I'm just looking here. So I'm about right there by March 1st. So,
Okay, nice.
and the days I do it, I notice a big difference.
Wow,
Like,
that's great.
A lot. Yeah. Yep. And I kind of gauge it off the mood. There's a calm meditation that I do, and then there's a focus meditation that I do. And I'm pretty certain I have ADHD, so there's certain mornings where my brain is really scrambled, and I do the focus meditation. It does slow things down and help me. And then the other days where I'm kind of feeling a little bit agitated or irritated because maybe I woke up late or whatever it may have been, it seems to work to calm me down and things of that nature too. So, and then the day goes better.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good for you.
All right, so that's all for today. And join us next week as we discuss boundaries. I'm Josh.
This is Lashana.
Stay authentic, well, and empowered.